All right, we good? All right, cool. So this is a very famous piece of colonial art. This is our first political cartoon in American history. It is also our first piece of political propaganda. When most people see this join or die political cartoon, they think of the American Revolution, and it will definitely be associated with the Revolution, but it was actually produced before the Revolution during the French and Indian War by Benjamin Franklin. All right? And it was initially produced to try to unite the colonists on the side of the British against the French during the French and Indian War. So we're going to talk a bit about this cartoon as we move forward today. Some of what I'm covering in this first part, a little bit of review, some of it is new. Bless you. I'm going to introduce you to a new person today in relation to the founding of New France. So when we talk about New France, we're predominantly talking about Canada, or at least Eastern Canada along the St. Lawrence Seaway. The main resources of value coming out of New France or Eastern Canada were furs, pelts, fish, and lumber. Obviously, we know France made a lot of money off sugar in the Caribbean, but the Caribbean colonies they're controlled by France, but it's a totally different flavor, right? The people that are going to settle in French Caribbean versus New France and Canada are a totally different group of people coming over from France. Remember, New France's capital was Quebec. It sat on the St. Lawrence Seaway. It was founded by Samuel de Champlain. He'll go on to establish another trading post city farther upriver, Montreal, and he'll do a lot of the exploring, not only just along the St. Lawrence, but even deeper into the interior in and along the Great Lakes. That's why we often refer to Samuel de Champlain as the father of New France. Most fur trappers, hunters, and fur traders that came over from France passed through Quebec at some point. It's kind of got the same flavor as the Dutch settling in New Amsterdam initially. Most of these folks come over independently to make money. We don't see large family units coming over like the Puritans in New England. That is why we see a lot of our French trappers and traders. You need a pass? Or you good? You good? I'm good. Okay, cool. A lot of these trappers and traders are going to intermarry with Native women, notably Huron and Algonquian women. Obviously, in our heart of hearts, we want them to have married for love. However, there are a lot of cases where there are marriages that are established for trade and military alliances in the region. Somebody earlier asked, did this mean that French trappers and traders took multiple wives? What do you all think? Yes, for sure. That was common. All right? So a lot of the French trappers and traders are going to hire natives, not only to help them with the work, but also they'll hire them as guides. So we start to see stronger relationships being built between the French and natives as you go deeper into the interior along the Ohio River Valley and the Mississippi River Valley. Often what we would refer to these individuals as, where are my French students at? Any French students in the house? Okay, none? Impressive. The Coureurs du Bois. My French is not good, but the name loosely translates to runners of the woods. Do you have a French background? No? You know any French? No? Okay, cool. No. All right, all good. So, a lot of Catholic missionaries are going to come over. In the early years of the settlement, it was predominantly Jesuit missionaries who were predominantly male that came over to convert natives. And then over time, we see another group come in They're called the French Acadians. These groups came over as family units to settle, but after the French and Indian War ended, most of the Acadians were expelled during the expulsion, and a lot of them wound up in and around New Orleans in the bayou. Have you ever heard of a group of people in New Orleans called the Cajuns before? That's a lot of the Cajuns, their roots were tied to the Acadians. The French started to settle the Ohio River Valley. It's not only great for hunting and fishing, but it's also fertile farmland. They go deeper into the mouth of the Ohio, where it dumps into the Mississippi. And that area, basically, that we know today as Illinois, became known as the Garden of New France because there was such great farming in the area. All throughout the Ohio River Valley and the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River Valley, the French start to establish forts, not only for trade, but also for defense. One of those forts that was quite famous was established by Antoine Cadillac. He establishes Detroit. Get it? The car Cadillac, named in his honor. The city of Straits, right on the border of Canada, on the Great Lakes, Lake Michigan, 1701 to 1702. As we already know, this is old news to us. Louisiana was claimed by Robert de La Salle. All of this was claimed in honor of King Louis XIV, the Sun King, and later this will lead to the establishment of New Orleans. We're definitely not done with New Orleans. We're going to talk more about New Orleans in the early New Nation as in a key trade city. And as previously mentioned, the fertile Ohio River Valley, Mississippi River Valley convergence of the Illinois country becomes fertile land for the development of multiple crops. It also leads to the establishment of forts and trading posts like Kaskaskia, Cahokia, Vincennes, St. Louis as another example. I've got a better image for you guys to take a look at here momentarily. Are there any questions about French settlement? A lot of this is review. We talked about it at the end of the lesson. Yeah, a lot of them. Remember, their exploration goes all the way back to like the 1500s. But remember, their exploration during the 1500s was them trying to find a northwest trade route. It's going to be everything after Champlain is going to be like permanent settlement.
Got it.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. So if we look, the little dotted areas like Quebec and Montreal, those are cities. And then these like diamond star shapes that are all throughout are forts. This fort here in what is now present-day Pittsburgh, that's the one that we're focused on today. That is where this French and Indian War begins, at Fort Duquesne, or just outside of Fort Duquesne, which is present-day Pittsburgh. On the right, that is what the typical Coureur du Bois, the runner of the woods, would have looked like. Again, my apologies for my horrible French. So, it's kind of weird that all of this sort of escalates due to a British ship captain having his ear cut off. But that's how this all kind of starts. So, there's a treaty between England and Spain not to cause naval warfare on the open seas. And there's a British merchant captain by the name of Robert Jenkins, who is going to not only serve as a merchant sea captain, but he's also a bit of a privateer and a smuggler. And he's going to tangle with a group of Spanish sailors, and a Spanish ship captain is going to sever off his ear. And Jenkins is going to take his severed ear and present it to Parliament, which will then lead to a small naval war that will happen off the coast of Georgia and Florida and throughout the Caribbean. Now, this little skirmish ultimately evolves into something larger, a larger naval war with entangling alliances that will involve France coming to the side of Spain, Prussia eventually coming to the side of Britain, and Austria and Russia also siding with both France and Spain as well. This becomes known as the War of Austrian Succession. In England and in the colonies, they called this King George's War. This was eventually tamped down for a little while through a treaty known as the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. However, in the midst of all this, the scene is set, even though there's this small period of peace that's ultimately going to lead to our first recorded war that happens from coast to coast from from Europe all the way to America. We're all familiar with Winston Churchill, right? Heard of him before, yeah? Well, he was a student of history, and he often referred to this as truly the First World War. I wouldn't go that far. But it is a global war because you start to get a lot of other countries involved. And really, the French and Indian War is two wars in one. It is full-scale war going on in America and full-scale war going on in Europe. So, this was the presentation of Jenkins' ear to Parliament. And then this is a really important crown jewel that will be fought over between the Brits and the French. Okay? This is called Fort Louisbourg or Fort Louisbourg. This was a massive fortress that had been controlled by France, taken by Britain in that war, and then handed back over to France. This is going to be one of the goals for Britain in the French and Indian War, to take possession of this fort again. And this is kind of crazy. This is the largest reconstructed fort in the Western Hemisphere. One of these days, I'd like to visit. This is super random. Did you and your brother ever visit here in Nova Scotia? Okay. This is a weird bucket list item. I'd like to make it there one of these days. So, isn't that cool though? It's amazing. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know if the family does that. Yeah. All right. So, how does Washington get pulled into all this? All right. So, tensions are still there. There is a lull in the global war in Europe. But here in America, as I've already mentioned, look, this is Virginia. It is massive. And Western PA, notably Pittsburgh, now Pittsburgh, then Fort Duquesne, sits in a prime spot. Just two of us have been to Pittsburgh before. 4 of us have been to Pittsburgh. Okay? When you went to Pittsburgh, you crossed over a bunch of rivers, didn't you? The Allegheny, the Monongahela. But what's also important about Pittsburgh, it's the headwaters of the Ohio. This is like the gateway to trading in the West and moving goods. So the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, a name we've all heard in our life. How many people out there have heard the name Dinwiddie before? Yeah. Well, the namesake of Dinwiddie County, Lieutenant Governor Robert Dinwiddie and his associates have land prospects in Western Virginia, notably Western PA on today's map. And they want the French out. They want Fort Duquesne to to be occupied by the Virginia militia, and they want the French to know it's time to head back to Canada. So he's going to employ the military leadership of George Washington. Remember, Washington got his rank at the age of 21, and he's going to go on this mission at the age of 22. And the goal, and I'm going to show you his path here momentarily, the goal with this detachment is to go out and push the French out because Duquesne was still under construction. It looks like Duquesne, but it's Duquesne. All right? So they get about 40 miles outside of present-day Pittsburgh, about 40 miles east, near an area called Monongahela or Great Meadows. And they're going to have a small battle with a French detachment from Duquesne. What we will call a small battle in this class from here on out, because we're going to be talking a lot about warfare moving forward, we call that a skirmish. But in this little skirmish, one of the commanders of Fort Duquesne was killed, and the French plan to retaliate. Washington and his soldiers fall back and retreat, and with their Native American scouts, they are hastily going to put together a fort called Fort Necessity. But ultimately, the fort is completely surrounded and besieged for a 10-hour-long siege until Washington is forced to surrender. Now, the interesting thing about this, the French could have totally wiped them all out, and that been the end of it. But what they allow Washington and his soldiers to do is return back to Williamsburg to let Dinwiddie know they're not going anywhere. Interestingly enough, they're welcomed back to Williamsburg as heroes. They ended up losing like a third of their men on this military expedition. I will say this. If you are wondering when the mythology and the lore of Washington starts, it starts here. And it will just continue to grow throughout the French and Indian War and beyond. So any questions about the start of this? Is everybody good? Am I going too fast? We good? All right. So this is Washington by Charles Willson Peale. This is arguably Peale's most famous painting. It hangs at Washington and Lee. I'm going to explain some of the symbolism going on with Washington's uniform here as we wrap things up today. Has anyone ever been to Fort Necessity? It's like outside Pittsburgh. It's kind of off the beaten path. And then this is the route that Washington took from Williamsburg to Alexandria to Fort Cumberland. And this area outside of Duquesne is where that initial skirmish took place. That turned into a larger battle and a rout. All right. So, global war and colonial disunity. The French and Indian War is also known as the 7 Years' War. It starts in America with Washington's battle outside of Fort Duquesne, outside of present-day Pittsburgh. But interestingly enough, the war is actually longer. It lasts 9 years in Europe. So it's a little deceiving to call it 7 Years' War. What this war will entail is fighting on the ground in America, notably in Appalachia and in Canada, fighting this war at sea, notably in the Caribbean, and also fighting on land in Europe. So it was a global war. England and Prussia, remember Germany's not unified yet, versus France, Spain, Austria, and Russia. So how do Indians come into this? France had more Native American allies, notably Huron and Algonquin, than the Brits and the colonists had. In fact, the large or most significant group of natives to join the fight with the British and the colonists doesn't happen until later in the war, when the Iroquois reluctantly agreed to join in the war, which it's going to ultimately lead to their demise, because when we get into the American Revolution, the Iroquois are going to have to choose sides. 4 of them go with the British, and 2 of the tribes of the Iroquois go with the Americans, or the colonists. In Germany, Prussia, Frederick the Great won the title of Great by repelling French, Austrian, and Russian armies, even though he was badly outnumbered. Fun fact, his military aide-de-camp, his right-hand man, was Baron von Steuben, who I'm going to teach you about later in this lesson. Von Steuben is a very important individual in the American Revolution. Has anyone ever heard of him before? Cool. So you're going to learn something new here as we move farther in the lesson. Also, kind of a fun thing that I learned over the weekend, David Ziegler was one of Frederick the Great's aides. He'll go on to, after this, he'll come to America to join the Continental Army to fight with Washington, and he'll later go on to become one of the founders and first mayor of Cincinnati, which I thought was kind of cool. I had no idea. A lot of people want the colonies to unite here, but you have to understand the colonies are not totally on the same page. You have to think about it in this sort of mindset. All the colonies kind of like view themselves as their own little countries. There's really only been one major unifying moment in colonial America up to this point militarily, and that was the formation of the New England Confederation. And there's really been only one universal religious moment of unity, and that's the Great Awakening. Okay? So the person that's really pushing for colonial unity is Ben Franklin. So Ben Franklin, he has kind of like 3 jobs going on. He's running the printing press, he's serving in a Pennsylvania militia, and he's also serving as a diplomat to an intercolonial meeting that will take place in Albany, New York. This is a big reason why Ben Franklin published the Join or Die cartoon, to try to get other colonists on board with unifying. But the meeting in Albany, New York, known as the Albany Congress, it only led to 7 colonies sending representation out of the 13. Furthermore, there's British representation there, as well as representation from the Iroquois. But by the time the Albany Congress is completed, and by the time Ben Franklin and other delegates write up the Albany Plan of Union to try to unify the colonies militarily, there's just not enough support. So the Albany Plan of Union just kind of falls apart and doesn't really go anywhere. But it has an important legacy, because there are going to be numerous members of this Congress that will later go on to represent their colonies at the first and later the second what? What Congress? When I say it, you're going to be like, right. Continental Congress. So, that's what I'm seeing heads shake yes. That makes my day. Lovely. So who was fighting on American soil here? In America, English, colonists, Iroquois versus French and Indians. Hence the name French and Indian War. And notably, the Huron and the Algonquian provided France with most of their allies in this. All right. So this is Ben Franklin's Join or Die cartoon here that was produced during the French and Indian War. Okay, this is where I pump the brakes today. Just going to get through this, and then we'll move on with our day. Braddock's blundering and aftermath. So, near the beginning of the war in 1755, the British know they've got to send soldiers and military leaders and ammunition and weapons and cannon and cavalry. Why?
Do you get a head start on the front?
Yes, because the colonists are not what?
Happy about this?
They're not happy about it, but also they don't have a lot of military training. The military training of the colonists was as elementary as you could imagine. In some cases, it was non-existent. These guys signed up to fight, and a lot of them had little to no training at all. That is one of the big reasons why the British and the colonists struggled terribly in the first couple of years of the war. Okay? So the commander that was sent over to lead British and colonial soldiers was 60-year-old General Edward Braddock. So what are they doing? They're bringing over soldiers, they're bringing over horses, they're bringing over cannon, they're bringing over ammunition, they're bringing over supply wagons, they're bringing all the things that you need to wage war. But most of this campaign is being fought in what very difficult terrain on the East Coast. Appalachia. Very good. Most of this fighting is happening in Appalachia. I don't know if anyone has spent any time hiking in Appalachia or the Allegheny Mountain Range. Imagine dragging a cannon behind you. Okay? This was hard going to try to get all the personnel and all the stuff to where they needed to go. So they are going to launch another assault or attempt to launch an assault on Fort Duquesne. This goes horribly. So horribly that Braddock loses nearly 2/3 of his force, and Braddock will be killed himself. Now, Washington survives. This is also where the Washington mythology is going to get going. He had 2 horses shot from underneath him in this battle. He also, it's believed that he had 4 bullet holes shot through his jacket. So people are like, what is this guy, a ghost? Like, what's happening? How's he surviving? He survived 2 major assaults launched by the French, and he's going to survive this war. But I'm telling you, after this ambush launched by the French outside of Pittsburgh at Fort Duquesne, the next string of events and the next string of defeats are nearly going to end all this for the British and the Americans. But the tide of the war is about to change when I see you guys next class. And I'm going to explain how the tide of the war begins to change as new, fresh soldiers and younger leaders are brought over to serve in this war. All right. So, Washington was one of the few colonists that served as a military aide to Braddock. And after Braddock's death, Washington received this sash. He will wear Braddock's sash in battle for the rest of his life. Now, this sash bounces around a little bit. Sometimes it's at Mount Vernon. Sometimes it's in the Smithsonian. And sometimes the battle sash is in Pittsburgh at the Heinz Museum. The Catchet people, they built one of the coolest American history museums on the East Coast. If you ever get a chance, go visit. It's amazing. It has one of the best French and Indian War exhibits of any museum in America. Highly recommended. Also, anybody collect baseball cards as a kid? And they also have one of the original Honus Wagners in there, which is the rarest, the most rare baseball card. It's a tobacco card. Anyway, So, little symbolism here. We have the gorget, which was ornamental and decorative, but also was supposed to be functional. You could wear it on the chest for protection or pull it up closer to the neck for protection. The gorget will fall out of fashion and use after the American Revolution. We have Braddock's sash, and then we have Washington's marching orders. So, I thought I would explain the painting in a little bit more detail for you. All right, so that is all I've got for today. There was a couple of other things that I wanted to mention.